to the cloud. Got it? Okay, so welcome. Here we go. I am going to share my screen. I'm just going to make sure everything's kosher here. Okay. All right. So first thing I want to show you guys is, oh, that's not what I wanted to show you at all. How about this? Today, for the first lab, it's kind of tricky for me because everyone seems to be coming from different backgrounds, so levels of programming experience, level of R programming experience, just different levels. So today I just want to make sure that we're all on the same playing field, and so that we have kind of the tools that we need to generate a basic document. Okay, kind of tricky because in class we haven't really covered anything that requires software yet, right? And so I thought this would be a good time to kind of get us started with working in Markdown and just kind of the basics, right? So if you're used to working in a Markdown document, then you can sit back and relax. And if you're not, then here we go. So what I did was I posted those old YouTube videos. Now it says it's for Stat 121 and 124, but what happened was they turned out to be a little bit too difficult for those guys. So at least in the beginning, just kind of laying out the lay of the land, I'll just be kind of using these notes, these labs, and they are here. So again, we'll use them here, at least the first few, right? And so the first chapter is installing R in RStudio, and the things that I want to introduce today are summarized in chapter 1 in the Hello World chapter. Hello World is a programming thing, and it just gives you a quick rundown of things that you can do in a language or in a document. So if we go to Hello World, right, I'm going to talk our way through this, but if you find that it's easier to just read something and follow along, then that works too, right? So everything that we're going to talk about, right, I'm going to talk about each of these sections. It's all outlined here. So so if you prefer this, then that's totally fine. But I'm going to blab our way through it. So I'm going to put this to the side in case I need it, but for now I want to open up RStudio. So confession time, I should have updated my version. It's from 2019. Yikes, I really should have updated. So I'll do that for next time, but I feel pretty confident that it hasn't really changed the look that much. So this is usually how it's laid out. So when we open it, when we open RStudio, it's usually got these 3 quadrants, right? And so, or I guess they're not quadrants if there's only 3. Anyways, we'll have 4 in a little bit here. So the main thing is the console. Now the console is R, it's the R console. So this is the brain and this is the calculator portion of it. Okay, so that's where we're gonna run commands and just kind of have it be working. Okay. What I want to do today is just start a new Markdown document. So just like before when and I know you did it because you handed it in, so I've seen it, so I know you know how to do it. So we're going to start a fresh R Markdown document. Okay, and just like before, I'm going to call it in this case, I'm going to call it Hello World. So I'll change the title here. The author is me, so that's fine. We're going to use HTML today, okay? But eventually we want to move towards making PDF outputs, right? Because it's hard to share an HTML document, or at least people think it's weird, right? And so we're not quite there yet. Although most people are reading on a screen, right? So the difference between HTML and PDF is going to be that the HTML is this continuous page, right? So we're not having to deal with page breaks, but that makes it hard to print, right? And so the reason we use PDFs is if we're printing, right? But really HTMLs are kind of more efficient because we don't have to deal with those page breaks, for example. Right, but they're kind of hard to share, and you saw it generates a little web page, right? And so it opens on your browser, and so it's different, right? Eventually, we want to move towards creating PDFs, right, of our reports, which requires some tech. Okay, so it's called text, but you read it as tech. And it's from LaTeX. LaTeX is a typesetting language. So if you think about Word, right, when we're typing in Word, we can do things like we can change the amount of the spacing between each paragraph, right? You can change things like where is a page break, right? That kind of thing. And so all of that can be programmed in LaTeX, okay? And so, and that's what we need to download to generate a PDF. So like I said, we're not going to do that today, but eventually I do want you to try to do that. So it might be fun to see if you can generate a PDF, just like we did last week with the HTML, right? Just to see if you can do it. Try to get a PDF up and running, right? Because the tricky part is I have LaTeX installed on this computer already. And so it's just going to do it if I tried to show you. But if you don't have any LaTeX installed, it will probably tell you, hey, you need to install this. Do you want to go to this website to do that? Yes, I do. Follow the trail. And usually it just kind of lays it out for you. We could generate a Word document, but and you can try it as long as you have Word installed, then you can generate a Word document. But I prefer a PDF output, and that's what I'm going to be expecting. Okay, so for now, the title, I'm going to call it Hello World, and I'm the author, and I'm generating an HTML. So if I hit OK here, right, notice that it bumps the console down, right? And I'm able to work in this upper left-hand quadrant, okay? So I'm gonna have my markdown file up here, and then I've got my console, my R console down in the lower left, okay? So that's where I'm gonna run my code, my R code, to make sure that it's working properly. And then as things come up, we're going to talk about these other two quadrants, right? Notice that it says the environment is empty. That's fine. And then here, there are different tabs, but I think the default is the viewer tab, but I don't know. But you can flip through those and see. So first thing I want to talk about is, well, first I should save this file. Right, and so remember, there are a couple of rules, and they might have changed it so that it can handle spaces, but typically it can't handle spaces when we name the file. So I'm going to hit save here. And for me, I usually work off of my desktop. So my desktop is kind of my active area, right? So my desktop, and I'm going to call this Hello World Emily, right? Something. So no spaces. I like camel type, but you could have underscores in there if you want, right? 2 or whatever. Once you've named it, you can hit save. So now notice that it changed the name up here, right? So that's something that we've done already. So now let's talk about the different components in here, right, in this document. So the first section that we see is just broken up by these dashes, right? 3 dashes in a row, dash, dash, dash. And then we've got some stuff, some information about the document, and then dash, dash, dash. So everything between these dashes is called the YAML. So I'll put it in the chat. YAML is yet another markup language. Kind of funny. So that's what the YAML stands for. And the reason I bring that up is, well, 1, it's funny, but 2 is because if you get an error message about the YAML, then you know where to look, right? It's in that top portion. Okay, and I'll generate an error code so you can see what I mean. Okay? But what we know about this document so far is that we could just hit knit and it would generate that HTML document. So let's try that for now. Okay. So what we have, right, it's got this title, hello world, and my name and the date, and then it's got this header is what we see. So there are a few different components here that we're going to break down, and I'm going to show you around and just kind of show you the things, some key things that we can do. Okay, but before I do that, let's make a change. So let's say I decide, oh, I'm not going to have the title be hello world. I just want it to be hello. It tries to warn me, right? It tries to warn me that something is wrong by removing the green. So now it's in black, right? And it looks like it should be in green. So it's trying to, but if I tried to knit here, right? And notice that the problem is that I removed the end quote, right? So if I remove it again and I knit it, it gives me an error code, error in YAML. Okay. And so part of kind of learning R and learning Markdown is figuring out these error codes. The more error codes you see, the quicker you'll be at figuring out what's wrong, what happened, right? And so when it says error in the YAML up here or down here, right, then you should be looking for some sort of error here. And then of course you see, oh, never mind, I changed my mind. I want it to be hello world, end quote. And then if I try to knit it, it should work. One thing that's kind of annoying until you get used to it is that every time you make a change and you want to see that change in your document, you're going to have to knit it, right? Because the changes won't be reflected as you go. Okay, but it's good to knit as often as possible, right? Because then you can catch any errors as you make them. Okay. So the next section I want to talk about is this default section that it adds in here. And so this is setting the global options. Now that doesn't make sense to us right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete it, and we can do that. That's okay. So I'm going to delete it, and then I'm going to knit it again just to make sure everything looks the same. Right. And so we'll come back to this, and we will probably end up using the global options but for now, we can just delete it and make our file a little bit easier to read. So I'll delete it, and then I'll hit knit. And it still worked. Hey, what's this? Wow, cool. I didn't know it did that. When I hover, it gives me a little, I don't know, it just bumps it down. Anyways, so now it still looks the same. You can scroll through and it looks the same as before, right? And so nothing's changed by deleting that code chunk. So next thing I want to talk about, I just want to keep it a little bit tighter here. Next thing I want to talk about is what's going on here. This is called a header, right? And so the header gives us output like this. Oh, sorry, it's just catching up. So notice it says R Markdown and it's big and it's bold, right? And so that would be like chapter 1, section 1, subsection 1, whatever. So we can make different level headers. So the largest header that we can make is a first level header. And some key things to remember about the headers is that they start with a pound sign. So starts with a number sign, okay? And however many pound signs we have, that's the level of the header. So the headers need to have a blank line in front, but also below, right? So ahead of it and below it, and it needs to have a space after the pound sign. So this is a first level header. So now if I knit this, notice that the first level header is even bigger than the second level header, right? And so we can use these to make the document look like how we want it to look, or to separate the document like chapter 1, section 1, subsection 1, etc. I don't know how deep the levels go. I would probably tap out at 4. So let's try 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth level header. I've intentionally included an error here just so we can see what it looks like. What didn't I do? I didn't put a space here, right? Just so we can recognize what happens if we forget to put a space. So I'm going to knit it. And notice that it just took it for text, right? Number, 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 fourth level header. So then I see that and I say, oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to behave like a header. So I'm going to go back in, add a space, knit it again to see what happens. So now it is a fourth level header, right? That's probably as far as I would go, right? We don't need like sixth level headers, but something to play around with. Okay. So that's headers. Next thing we see here is, so it's also explaining to us things that we can do. For example, for help pages, we can go to rmarkdown.rstudio.com. So how this generates in our knitted document is that it becomes this clickable link, right? And I use this quite a bit, especially if I'm writing documentation to myself, right? Sometimes I'll say, oh, I got this information from this link here, and then I just usually have that for myself, and then I can refer back to it and see where I got information from, right? And so that's going to be really useful. And all you need to do is have the address, of course, the website, enclosed in angle brackets. So we decided that in my last lab that they're called angle brackets. I was calling them less than, greater than, but angle brackets makes more sense, right? And so we can use these angle brackets to wrap up a website that we want to have as clickable in our file. We can also do things like we can make text bold, we can italicize, we can make it bold and italicized, right? And so, and we can Google our way to it. I'm going to show you how to do those three things. If we go back here, we notice, let it catch up here. We notice that the star around a word, right, just by kind of comparing, contrasting here, we notice that it makes it bold, right? It looks like it's going to make the word bold. We could even change it so that it's around more than one word, right? As long as I put star around, it should bold whatever I put the stars around. Okay. Italicizing, I think there are a couple of ways that we can italicize. I like the underscore. So we can wrap up whatever text we want italicized with underscores. So let's see here. How about I italicize as well as the output? So using underscores is going to italicize the text. And like I said, I think using maybe one star does the same thing, but anyways. So if I knit this, as well as the output is italicized, so that's good. Notice that it acknowledges what I did and that it's going to affect the text somehow by changing the color, right? And so that's how I know that I've closed off that command. So what if I want to bold and italicize? As long as I wrap the commands up with symmetry, the order I don't think matters. So here, I'm going to start with an underscore star. Then whatever I want to bold and italicize, I'll do R codes within bold and italicized. Right, so as long as it's symmetric around the text, it should work. It might still work if it isn't, but I just like the symmetry maybe. So then if I knit it, that little chunk of code or text should be bold and italicized, which it seems to be. Okay. So what's going to happen is, imagine that you're working on a report, kind of old school, right? And so you're working with Word and Excel maybe, right? And what you would probably do is write your text in Word, right? And then you would do your calculations and your graphs and everything in Excel. And then you would copy and paste it into a Word document. Okay, but that gets really clunky and really tedious, especially if you have to change the data, right? And there are ways that you can link them, but it's really clunky. So here, what we're able to do when we say knit, really what we're doing is we're knitting together text and R code into one document, right? And so how I want you to think of it is this white area of the file is basically going to be our Word document, right? This is where we write things about our analyses, our findings, right? Explain what we did. So everything that you would write in Word would go in this white section of the document, right? In Markdown. Whereas here, notice that this section is all grayed out, right? So these gray areas are going to be your R code chunks. They're called code chunks. So this is an R code chunk. and it just says, okay, switch gears for a second and use the R brain instead and do these calculations, right? And so this would be the equivalent of Excel, right? Whenever you would use Excel to do anything, this is where you're going to do it. Now, I wanted to talk about bullets and lists before I talk about the R code. So below here, I'm going to start a second level header called bullets. Okay. So I just want to show you how to generate bullets. And then once we know how to make headers, different level headers, bold and italicized text, make bullets and make lists, then we have pretty much everything that we could need in a core report. So for bullets, we're going to start with just saying here is a bullet list. So again, there are some rules around bullets. We have to have an empty space between text and the bullets. So first I'm going to make a space here, and then bullets are indicated by a dash. So here's a dash, and just like the headers, we have to have a space between the dash and the text that is in our bullet. So here we have bullet 1. Oh, why isn't it typing? Bullet 1. Okay, so space here and a space after the dash before the text. And then I can make bullet 2, oops, and so on and so forth. So when I knit this, it's going to generate kind of nice looking bullets. All right, so here's a bullet list, bullet 1, bullet 2, great. How about here is a numbered list. To make a numbered list is really cool because all we need to do is give it the starting number, and then it just takes it from there. So if I do 1 point, hey, why does it keep changing? 1 point, again, we need a space following that numbered list indicator. And so here we have number 1. And what's kind of fun is that we can just keep going with 1, number 2, 1 dot number 3. And let's knit this to see what happens. So here it gave us our numbered list starting with 1, but then it took the reins and said, okay, you want me to start at 1? You got it. 1, 2, 3. So even though we didn't have 1, 2, 3 here, it just generated those. So what's nice about having them all be 1, assuming you want your list to start at 1, is that you can do things like, oh, I changed my mind. I want this number up here. Okay, so then I'm going to move it. I cut it and I pasted it at the top. And what happens is now number 3 is at the top, but 1, 2, 3, it retains that order. Right? Even if I wanted to maybe not start at 1, maybe I wanted to start at 14. I don't know, seems weird, but maybe. So what if I knit this now? 14, 15, 16, right? So it just takes the first one and then just follows that pattern. Okay. Here is another alphabetic list. Is that what it's called? When it's A, B, C, D, E. Here is another list, let's say. Cheat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to forget to put the empty line. So here I'm going to have A dot 1, B dot 2, C.3. Okay, so I've made this mistake. I don't have a space here. So let's just see what it's going to look like when I knit it. So when I knit it, it definitely doesn't look like how I expected it to, right? Here's another list, A1, B2, C3, but it's all on the same line and it didn't generate a list. So then if I go in here and I give it that space and knit it again, now it's generated that list, right? Even if I do things like I copy and paste that last one in the top row, so now I have 3, 1, 2, 3, and I've told it to start at C, right? Just kind of playing around with it, getting comfortable. It said, okay, you want me to start at C? Fine. C, D, E, F. Yeah. So those are kind of the main things that you might want to do with text. If you want to do something more sophisticated, like make a table, for example, that's possible. You can just Google your way to it, right? I shouldn't say just, right? That takes practice. But everything is out there if you know what you want. Okay, so those are all the lists that I wanted to talk about. So now let's talk about this R code chunk. So this R code chunk it starts with a tick, tick, tick. I call it a tick, tick, tick environment or an R code chunk, right? And so at the bare minimum to start an R code chunk, what we need is the tick, tick, tick. Okay, and it's hard to find initially, but my tick, tick, tick is over on the left-hand side, the upper left on my keyboard. So try to find the tick, tick, tick and try it. So I'm going to do tick, tick, tick. And then all I need for a basic R code chunk is a curly bracket. And notice that it completes the curly bracket with a lowercase r in it. And that's just to tell it that, okay, now I'm going to give you some R code. Okay, and then it looks for R code until it sees the closing tick, tick, tick. So notice that everything is gray now because we haven't closed this R code chunk that we started. And so typically what I do is I just close it off just so it doesn't complain so much, even if I haven't put anything inside there yet. Okay. So this is all we really need for a basic R code chunk, right? Everything else is extra and adding options. For example, they've labeled and given it a name called cars. Right, that's for later when you're working in a huge document. It might be useful to name some of your code chunks. Right, for us, nah. Right, until we feel the need to name them, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so what we can do is we can enter some R code. Right, so the cars data set is built into base R. So when you downloaded R, it came with some data sets, a lot of data sets, some kind of commonly used data sets for practice. So the cars data set is already in there. So when I type cars, okay, I type it in the R code chunk. And so how I'm going to use this is where I'm going to save my R code, right? So everything that I do, I want to type it in here kind of to save it, but typing it in here doesn't run it. Okay, so the difference between saving it and running it is actually doing the thing I told it to do. So what we're going to do is in the console, right? The console is in the lower left. Right now it has this R Markdown tab open, but you can switch over to the console, and this is the R console. So when you're first starting, you can do something like, because it's really visual, you can do something like highlighting what you want to run, copy it, paste it into the console, and then hit enter. Okay. So the cars data set is data collected on the speed of a car and I think it's the stopping distance. Okay. And I did look it up earlier. This data is from the 1920s, so it's very outdated, but it's still, you know, a usable data set. So the cars data set has two variables, speed and distance, right? Both of which are numerical, and we can kind of run summaries on this. But for now, right, we've got 50 data points. And so that's the data set that they use by default just to show you some of the functions. So the cars data is something that we might have looked at in our analyses. If we don't want it to run and be included in our report, for example, I'll show you what it looks like when we have this cars command in our report. Show you how ugly it is. So here's everything we did. And then it says, okay, you asked for the cars. Here is the cars data. That's really useless. That tells me no information, right? It just gives the data set. So what we can do, even though that is something that we did, we've got two options. We could add a comment. So comment it out, right? So if we're commenting in R, we use a number sign, which can get confusing because we just use number signs or pound signs here in our headers. But notice that we're in different environments, so they mean different things. So in the Markdown environment, the number sign means headers, right? Create a header to separate the document. Here, the number sign in our code means it's a comment, which means here it is, but don't run it. Okay, so now when I hit knit, notice that it shows the code that I had, but it doesn't run it. Okay, so that might be one way that I get you to show what you've tried without it being included in your report, right? For me, I want to see what you've done, and so that might be one way to do it. So, okay. The next thing that we can do is, so we've got the summary command, the summary of cars. And if I go back to our report here, the summary of cars gives us the 5-number summary as well as the mean, right? And if we have the median and the mean, we're able to look at this and compare those values and see what the shape might be. For example, if the median is really close to the mean, then the distribution is symmetric, which means it's likely normal, right? It likely follows a normal distribution. Versus if the median is different from the mean, right? Then we need to remember that the mean is always pulled in the direction of the tail, right? Which is also the direction of the skew. And that's just from Stat 230 or whatever other stats course you've taken, right? And so here, just knowing the median and the mean tells me that the distribution of the distances is likely skewed to the right, or has a positive skew, which we can confirm by making graphs. But I don't think we'll have time to get there today. Okay, so they do have a plot by default in here, right? And so notice that, okay, they've set it up, they've got the basic R code structure, and then they say plot the pressure. Now the pressure data is also just included in when you downloaded R. So here we can remove the name pressure because that's just the name of the code chunk. And echo equals false. I'm going to keep that, and we'll try to figure out what that means just by looking at the output. So if I run it, it says underneath, but just in case. So if I run this, notice that it doesn't include any R code here. So if you wanted to produce a nice clean document without any R code, right, if you're handing it to your boss, for example, then they probably don't care about the code that you use, the fancy code that you wrote to generate it. They just want to look at the graphs, right? And so in that case, you would have this echo equals false, right? Which just means echo in this case means echo the R code that was used to generate it. And then setting it to false just means don't do it, okay? And so the default is going to be echo equals true. So if I just delete it, then it should include the R code above the plot. Yeah, like this. So remember that chunk, that initial chunk that was here that I deleted, where we said it sets the global options? What that would do is if you never wanted to show any R code, you could set the global options to be echo equals false, right? And then you don't have to type it every time, right? If you catch yourself typing the same thing over and over and over again, you can probably streamline that a little bit. Okay. So let me just scroll through here to make sure I didn't forget anything. But, oh yeah, we can do simple calculations, but I'll leave that for now. Okay. Good. Because I didn't do it in the lab this morning, so I don't want to go any further, but second time around, I'm a little bit faster, so I guess that's the benefit of the afternoon one. But that's all I wanted to show you guys today, just to get you up and running. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a practice document for you to submit. And it'll be these questions, more or less, the on your own questions, but I'm not going to get you guys to do number 7. Okay. Because I didn't get to cover it in the first lab, so it doesn't make sense to do more in the second lab. But I'll post instructions and you'll have all next week to work on it, so don't worry. Does anyone have any questions? It's crickets. I'm going to stop sharing here. If you don't have any questions, then you're free to go. And I hope you have a great weekend. And I'll see you on Tuesday. All right. Oh, and I guess I can stop this recording.